Hello everyone, this is Medical Gateway, and in this part we're going to study regarding the memory cells and the primary and secondary immune response. So what is primary and secondary immune response, and what is the significance of memory cells with reference to them? So whenever there is exposure to antigen, what happens? The B cells will be converted into plasma cells, and the plasma cells will produce antibodies. Okay, so on the first exposure to antigen, a foreign antigen has entered into the body for the first time. The B cell will be converted into plasma cell by following the whole pathway. First of all, B cell will be converted into lymphoblast, and then lymphoblast will be converted into the plasmablasts, and plasmablast will be converted into the plasma cell, and plasma cell will produce a lot of antibodies. Okay, so this process will take some time. So between the antigen exposure and the production of antibodies, there are many steps. So between the exposure and the production of the antibodies, there is some time lag. Okay, another interesting feature is that whenever there is exposure to the antigen, the B cells, B lymphocytes, will also produce memory cells. Okay, now these are basically memory B cells, which are basically memory cells of this specific clone of B cell. And as you know, whenever an antigen comes in the body, a specific clone of B cell or T cell is activated. So in this case, a specific clone is activated, and this is the memory cell of that specific clone of B cell. So this memory B cell is very specific to this antigen. Okay, now what is going to happen on the second antigen exposure? Now, second antigen exposure will give a very fast response as compared to the first exposure. The response of the second antigen exposure, the response of the antibody production for the second antigen exposure will be way more than the first exposure, and this will be way more prolonged. Okay, now what exactly happens in the second antigen exposure? That this second antigen exposure is going to activate these both pathways. Now, the memory cell is going to produce antibodies, as well as the B cells with the previous pathway is also going to produce the antibodies. So that's why in second antigen exposure, the body response with reference to the production of antibodies will be way more as compared to the first antigen response. And the second thing is that these memory cells will be converted way more quickly into the plasma cells, and they will produce the antibodies. So this pathway takes a lot more time as compared to this pathway. So already these memory cells have been identified by the first exposure, that this is the memory B cell which will be activated on the exposure of the specific antigen. So this memory, and the second thing is that this memory cell will be converted into the plasma cell way more quickly than a normal B cell is converted into plasma cell. So this pathway is way more fast, as well as this pathway is way more stronger. This will result into production of more antibodies. And the third interesting point is that these memory cells will keep on producing the antibodies for a way more longer duration of time. So they are activated fast, they will produce antibodies fast, they will produce more antibodies, and their duration of action is also prolonged. So because of the addition of these memory cells during the second antigen exposure, there will be less time for activation, then there will be added response, and then there will be prolonged response. So if with the reference to the graph, I'm going to explain the primary and the secondary response. So on the, for instance, on this x-axis there is time, on this y-axis there is antibody concentration. So here is the first antibody exposure to the body. So when the antibody is exposed to the body, body will take some lag time between the exposure and the production of the antibodies. Number one. Secondly, the body will produce some antibodies, and this is the maximum concentration of the antibodies production. And after that, the production of the antibody will fall down. But when the second exposure comes, this response will come way more fast. The lag time here is more, the lag time here is less, and the amount of the antibody production will be way more than as compared to the primary response. And then the primary response just dies out immediately, whereas the secondary response just keeps going on and on. It means the antibodies are being produced for a prolonged duration of time. So these are the three differences: the time of activation, the added response, and the prolonged response time. And the body just keeps on producing antibodies. And this principle is applied during the vaccination. As you all know, that the vaccinations for most of the things are given in doses. So the first dose acts like a primary response, whereas the second dose acts like a secondary response. So that's why there is a schedule for the vaccination, that some of the vaccinations are having 2 doses, some of the vaccinations are having 3 doses after a specific period of time with the gap of months or years. So the booster is extremely necessary. The second and the third doses are very necessary for a prolonged duration of action of that vaccine. Okay, so these are memory cells, and this is the primary and the secondary immune responses. See you in next part.